You think you know medicine, then cure him, Doctor laughed at the cleaning lady, but Dorothy Johnson clutched the mop with trembling hands as the laughter echoed down the hallway of Mercy General Hospital. At 68, she'd seen it all within those white walls, but she'd never felt a humiliation as deep as the one she'd just endured. Dr. Richard Thompson had just mocked her in front of the entire medical team when she dared to suggest something about the treatment of Mr. Walter, the elderly patient who had been in a coma for 3 weeks in room 405. The doctor's words still burned in her ears like hot iron on skin. You think 20 years of mopping floors gives you medical knowledge, what he'd said, drawing laughter from the residents. Go back to your broom and leave medicine to those who actually studied. Dorothy swallowed her tears and kept cleaning, but her observations about that patient wouldn't leave her mind. All these days, she'd noticed something no one else seemed to. Whenever she entered room 405 for her morning cleaning, always humming an old country song under her breath, Mr. Walter's fingers would twitch slightly. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she was sure of what she saw. The first time she tried to tell the head nurse, Sister Margaret, she was gently dismissed with a patronizing smile. The second time she mentioned it to Dr. Richard, he didn't even look her in the eye, just waved his hand as if shooing away a bothersome fly. But today had been different. Today she'd mustered her courage and interrupted the medical discussion in the hallway, right in front of the residents and students following the doctor on his morning rounds. "Doctor, with all due respect," she began, taking a deep breath. "I've noticed Mr. Walter reacting when I sing. His fingers move, I'm sure of it." The silence that followed was deafening. "Doctor," Richard stopped walking and slowly turned to her, his brown eyes flashing with irritation and disbelief. "Miss..." He glanced at her name tag. "Dorothy, do you have any medical training I'm unaware of?" "No, doctor, but..." "Residency? Specialization? At least a high school diploma?" Dorothy's cheeks burned. She'd stopped school in the 5th grade to help her mother raise her younger siblings, but that didn't mean she was stupid or that she didn't notice things around her. "Doctor, You just wanted to give your opinion on matters you don't understand," he cut in, his voice echoing down the hall. "Mr. Walter is in a deep coma due to a massive stroke. His neurological responses are minimal, and any movement you think you've seen is just involuntary muscle spasms." The residents chuckled softly, some shaking their heads as if watching a child trying to explain something complicated to adults. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. Dr. Richard took a step forward, standing dangerously close to Dorothy. She could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the coffee scent clinging to his pristine lab coat. "You think you know medicine? Then cure him," he said, pointing to the door of room 405. "Since your observations are so precise, since you're so sure of what you see, prove it to us. Wake the patient with your little songs." The taunt was the final blow. Dorothy's face burned with shame as the students' laughter filled the air. Sister Margaret, who had witnessed the whole scene, approached her. "Dorothy, go back to your work," the head nurse said firmly, though not unkindly, "and avoid interrupting medical discussions." Now, 2 hours later, Dorothy still tasted the bitterness of humiliation in her mouth. She was in the staff locker room, changing out of her light blue uniform into her regular clothes, when she heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. Dr. Richard Thompson's voice echoed as he gave instructions to someone. "Increase the sedative dosage. I don't want him having any more episodes of agitation tonight." Dorothy stopped changing. Episodes of agitation? Since when had Mr. Walter been agitated? She had been in his room less than an hour ago, and he seemed exactly as always. Motionless, eyes closed, breathing with the help of machines. Curious, she slipped her rubber shoes back on and quietly walked to room 405. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see Dr. Richard by the bed, checking the monitors. Beside him stood Mike, one of the younger nurses, holding a syringe. "He was moving his hands again, Doctor," Mike said softly, "right when the cleaning lady was here singing." Dorothy's heart raced, so Mike had noticed too. Coincidence, Dr. Richard replied curtly. Muscle spasms, as I've explained. Administer the sedative. But doctor, maybe we should… Mike! The doctor's voice dropped dangerously low. Are you questioning my diagnosis too? First, I have to put up with a cleaning lady's opinions, and now my own nurses doubt my competence? No, doctor, I'm sorry. Dorothy watched as Mike injected the sedative into Mr. Walter's IV. Instinctively, she wanted to step in and protest, but Dr. Richard's words still echoed in her mind. Who was she to question? Just a cleaning lady with no education, no degree, nothing but 20 years of observing those hallways. She returned to the locker room, but couldn't bring herself to leave. Something in her chest kept her from walking out of the hospital, knowing that maybe, just maybe, she was right about Mr. Walter. Over all these years, Dorothy had developed a special intuition about patients. She knew when someone was improving before the doctors noticed. She knew when someone was in pain, even if they couldn't speak. She knew when someone needed a comforting touch, a kind word, or a song to feel less alone. It wasn't formal medicine, she admitted that, but it was something real, something she had learned from watching, caring, truly paying attention to every person in those beds. Mr. Walter wasn't just another patient to her. Dorothy had known him before the accident. He lived in her neighborhood, Woodside, in central San Diego. A widower retired, he walked to the bakery every morning, always humming the same country song from the 70s. In fact, that was why she had started humming that particular song while cleaning his room. It was Country Roads by John Denver, the tune Mr. Walter always whistled while buying his morning bread. Walter Harrison Smith was 72 and had worked as the conductor of the San Diego Municipal Band for nearly 40 years. Dorothy had learned this from talking to Mrs. Jenkins, his neighbor, who visited him every day. The old conductor had dedicated his whole life to music, leading performances in town squares, graduations, and local festivals. 3 weeks ago, he'd suffered a stroke while watering the plants in his backyard. His neighbor found him collapsed, still clutching the hose, water spilling everywhere. Since then, he'd been in room 405, surrounded by machines, showing no signs of improvement. Dr. Richard insisted his condition was irreversible. He'd already spoken to Mr. Walter's son, David, explaining that the chances of recovery were slim. The tests showed extensive brain damage, and the family should prepare for the worst. But Dorothy wouldn't accept that verdict. Not when she saw the old conductor's fingers moving in perfect rhythm to the song she was singing. Not when she noticed his breathing always calmed as soon as she began the first notes of Country Roads. She decided to go home but promised herself she'd try again the next day. Maybe if she talked to David, Mr. Walter's son, he might allow a different approach. Maybe if she explained it right, someone would listen. The night was long for Dorothy. She lived alone in a small apartment on Maple Street, just a few miles from the hospital. Her husband, Robert, had passed 5 years ago, a victim of lung cancer. Her children lived far away, each busy with their own lives, and their visits were rare. During the sleepless hours, Dorothy replayed the scene in the hallway. Dr. Richard's words echoed in her mind like a cruel chant. Was she really imagining things? Was her desire to help making her see movements that weren't there? She got out of bed at 5 in the morning and brewed strong coffee. Her shift started at 6 and she always arrived a little early to organize her cleaning supplies. As she sipped the bitter coffee, she looked at the photo of her husband on the living room side table. "Robert, do you think I'm losing my mind?" she asked the smiling portrait. "Do you think I should keep pushing or just let it go?" The answer, of course, never came, but Dorothy felt a strange strength in her chest, as if Robert were whispering in her ear. "Go ahead, old girl. You've always known what you were doing." She arrived at the hospital determined. First, she made her usual rounds through the other floors, cleaning bathrooms, wards, and hallways. She saved room 405 for last, as she always did. It was an unconscious strategy, finishing her work, with the hope of seeing some improvement in the old conductor. When she reached the room, she found David sitting in the chair beside the bed. The 45-year-old man's eyes were red from crying, and he held his father's still hand. "Good morning, David," Dorothy said softly, knocking before entering. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson. Please, come in." David recognized Dorothy by sight. Over these 3 weeks, they'd exchanged words a few times. always brief conversations about his father's condition. "How was his night?" she asked, starting to clean discreetly around the bed. "The doctor said they gave him a stronger sedative. I think he was having muscle spasms." Dorothy stopped wiping and looked at David. "Muscle spasms? That's what Dr. Richard said. He told me it's normal for patients in a deep coma." The cleaning woman took a deep breath. It was now or never. "David, can I tell you something? It might sound silly, but..." "Go ahead, Mrs. Johnson. Right now, anything that might help my father." "I've noticed something. When I sing a certain song, your father reacts. His fingers move like he's trying to follow the rhythm." David frowned, intrigued. "What song?" "Country Roads. You know that John Denver song? Your father used to hum it all the time at the neighborhood bakery." David's eyes filled with tears. "My God, that song. Dad always said it was his favorite to conduct. He led Country Roads in dozens of the municipal band's performances." "Really?" Dorothy's heart raced. "Absolutely. It was kind of his signature piece. Whenever someone asked for a special song, he always picked Country Roads. Said it was the one that best captured the American spirit." Dorothy stepped closer to the bed and looked at Mr. Walters' peaceful face. "David, would you let me try singing to him, just to see if..." "Of course, Mrs. Dorothy. For heaven's sake, sing. If there's any chance..." Dorothy cleared her throat and began to softly sing. "Oh, Country Roads Without Sails, accordion player. You touched my heart. Oh, Country Roads Without Sails, accordion player. You touched my heart." Before she could even finish the first verse, it happened. Mr. Walters' fingers on his right hand began to move slightly, as if conducting an invisible orchestra. David held his breath, his eyes wide with emotion. "My God," he whispered. "Dad? Dad, can you hear me?" Dorothy kept singing and the movements grew more pronounced. They weren't random spasms, there was a pattern, a rhythm, as if the old conductor was trying to lead the music he loved so much. "He's conducting," David exclaimed, tears streaming down his face. "Mrs. Dorothy, he's conducting the music." At that moment, the door swung open abruptly. Dr. Richard entered the room with his usual stern expression, followed by two residents. When he saw Dorothy singing by the bedside, his face twisted in anger. "What's going on here?" he shouted. "I expressly forbade anyone from interfering with this patient's treatment." David stood up from his chair, still emotional. "Doctor, look. My father is reacting to the music. His fingers are moving to the beat." Dr. Richard approached the bed and observed the subtle movements of the patient's hand. For a moment, Dorothy thought she saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual irritation. "These are muscle spasms induced by auditory stimulation," he said coldly. "Neurological reflexes with no real clinical significance." "But doctor," David insisted, "they're not random movements. He's conducting. My father was a conductor. Mr. David, I understand your desperation, but we can't confuse basic reflexes with real improvement. This woman," he pointed at Dorothy, "is giving you false hope." Dorothy felt anger boiling in her chest. "Doctor, with all due respect, these aren't reflexes. I've watched this man for 3 weeks. Only when I sing this specific song does he react like this. It's not a coincidence." "You've watched him?" Dr. Richard let out a sarcastic laugh. "Ma'am, you mop floors. You aren't qualified to observe anything medical." "I don't need a degree to see this man is trying to communicate." "Enough!" the doctor snapped. "I want you out of this room immediately, and don't come back. I'll be speaking to administration about this inappropriate behavior." David stepped between the doctor and Dorothy. "Wait a minute, doctor. This woman is trying to help my father, and I saw with my own eyes how he reacted to the music." "You're seeing what you want to see," Dr. Richard replied, adjusting his lab coat impatiently. "I'll increase the sedative dosage to prevent these episodes of agitation." "Agitation?" David raised his voice. "My father isn't agitated. He's trying to respond. Mr. David, please understand your father suffered a massive stroke. The neurological damage is irreversible. Any movements you think you're seeing are just spasms, I know," David interrupted, his patience wearing thin. "But what if they're not? What if there's even the slightest chance?" Dr. Richard sighed deeply, as if dealing with stubborn children. There is no chance, Mr. David. Believe me, I've been a doctor for 15 years. I've seen hundreds of cases like this. Then why not let her try? David asked, gesturing to Dorothy. If there's really no chance, what's the harm in letting her sing? Because it's unethical to give false hope, and because I don't allow unqualified staff to interfere with my treatments. Just then, a faint voice echoed through the room. Everyone turned to the bed, where Mr. Walter had slightly opened his eyes and moved his lips. "Country roads," he whispered, his voice hoarse and almost inaudible. The silence that followed was deafening. David rushed to his father's side, holding his hand. "Dad! Dad, you're waking up!" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Dr. Richard Thompson stood frozen in the middle of the room, his expression shifting between surprise and disbelief. The residents exchanged glances, confused. Dorothy Johnson timidly approached the bed, tears in her eyes. "Mr. Walter," she called softly, "can you hear us?" The old conductor moved his head slightly toward her voice. His eyes, though cloudy, seemed to try focusing on her face. "Music," he murmured. "Country roads." David was overjoyed. "Doctor," he spoke. "My father spoke." Dr. Richard stepped closer to the bed, checking the patient's pupils with a small flashlight. His expression remained skeptical. "It might just be a moment of temporary clarity," he said, but his voice had lost its earlier conviction. "This sometimes happens with brain trauma cases." "Temporary?" David turned to the doctor, indignant. "My father just spoke. He reacted to the music, exactly like Mrs. Dorothy said he would." Dorothy moved even closer to the bed and, with David's silent permission, began humming again. "Oh, country roads without sails, accordion player, you play my heart." This time the reaction was even clearer. Mr. Walter tried to move his lips along with the song, his fingers conducting the rhythm more firmly, and his eyes gained a brightness that hadn't been there moments before. "Mom, Anne," he whispered, mistaking Dorothy for someone from his past. David grew even more emotional. "Anne was my mother, Doctor. She passed away 10 years ago. Dad always said she sang country roads to him when they were young." Dr. Richard watched everything with an increasingly uncomfortable expression. The residents whispered among themselves, clearly impressed by what they were witnessing. "Doctor," said one of the residents, a thin young man with glasses, "maybe we should consider music therapy. I've read some studies about—" "Dr. Williams," Dr. Richard cut in sharply. "Let's stick to established protocols." But the young resident didn't back down. "But doctor, the protocols include exploring all therapeutic possibilities. If the patient is responding to musical stimulation, the patient is responding to basic neurological reflexes," Dr. Richard insisted, but his voice sounded less convincing. At that moment, Mr. Walter did something no one expected. With great effort, he slowly raised his right hand and made a gesture as if conducting. His lips moved, trying to follow the melody Dorothy was still humming softly. "My band," he whispered more clearly. "My music." David could no longer hold back his tears. "Doctor, my father is coming back. He's remembering the town band. He conducted this song dozens of times." Dr. Richard stayed silent for a few moments, watching the patient closely. Finally, he sighed and turned to the residents. "Let's let the patient rest. We need to reassess his condition." "Wait," Dorothy called, gathering all her courage. "Doctor, aren't you going to stop the sedative?" All eyes turned to her. Dr. Richard seemed to hesitate for a moment. "The sedative is necessary to what?" David interrupted. "To stop my father from responding? To keep him unconscious when there's a real chance of recovery?" "Mr. David, the sedative prevents agitation and—" "The only agitation I see here is yours," David shot back, his patience completely gone. "My father isn't agitated. He's trying to communicate, and you want to sedate him, Doctor." Dr. Richard straightened up, his authority being publicly challenged. "Mr. David, I am the physician in charge of this case. Treatment decisions are mine to make. And I am his son with legal rights over medical decisions when he can't make them himself, David shot back, surprising everyone with his firmness. Dorothy watched the argument with a heavy heart. On one side, she saw Dr. Richard fighting to maintain his authority and pride. On the other, she saw David, desperate to save his father. And in the middle of it all was Mr. Walter, still reacting weakly to the sounds of the music she kept softly humming. "Dr. Richard," she said, trying to be respectful but firm, "could you at least try stopping the sedative for a day, just to see if he responds more?" "A cleaning lady has no authority to suggest changes to medical treatment," he replied, though his voice was weaker. "But a son does," David said with determination, "and as my father's legal guardian, I formally request that the sedative be suspended." Dr. Richard found himself in a difficult position. Technically, David was right about his legal rights, and with 2 residents witnessing everything, he couldn't simply ignore a formal request from a family member. "Very well," he said after a tense pause. "We'll suspend the sedative for 24 hours, but if there's no significant improvement, we'll return to the original protocol." David nodded vigorously. "Agreed. And I want Mrs. Dorothy to be allowed to continue with the music therapy." Dr. Richard looked at Dorothy with an expression mixing irritation and resignation, as long as it doesn't interfere with necessary medical procedures. Dorothy nodded quickly, hardly believing she had gotten official permission. "Thank you, Doctor. I promise I won't be a bother." "And I want everything documented," David added. "I want records of all my father's reactions to the music." Dr. Williams, the young resident, immediately volunteered. "I can take charge of the records, Doctor. I think it would be interesting to document the neurological response patterns." Dr. Richard nodded reluctantly and left the room, followed by the residents, but not without giving Dorothy a warning look. When they were alone, David turned to her with gratitude. "Mrs. Dorothy, I don't know how to thank you if you hadn't insisted." "No need to thank me, Mr. David. I just want to see your father get better." They stood in silence for a few minutes, watching Mr. Walter. He had closed his eyes again, but his breathing seemed steadier, less dependent on the machines. "Mrs. Dorothy, can I ask you something?" David said. "Of course. How did you know about this song? How did you know it was special to him?" Dorothy smiled softly. "I've lived in the same neighborhood as your father for over 20 years. I always saw him at the bakery in the mornings, humming Country Roads. It was like that song was a part of him, you know?" "My mother always said that," David said, emotional, "that Country Roads was the soundtrack of Dad's life." "And it probably still is," Dorothy replied. "I think the music is etched so deep in his soul that not even the stroke could erase it." David was thoughtful for a moment. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you have children?" "I have 3. But they live far away, each living their own lives." "Then you understand what it means to see someone you love. Like this, don't you?" Dorothy nodded, remembering Robert's last days in the hospital. "I do. And that's why I couldn't give up on your father, because he deserves a chance. Deserves someone who believes in him." David held her hand warmly. "You're an angel, Mrs. Dorothy, an angel God placed in my father's path." "I'm no angel," Dorothy laughed. "I'm just a stubborn old woman who spent her life observing people." They talked a little longer about Mr. Walter's life, about his career as a conductor, about the municipal band's performances, about how he dedicated his entire life to music. David shared that his father always said music was the universal language, that it could touch people's souls even when words failed. "Maybe that's it," Dorothy said thoughtfully. "Maybe the music is touching your father's soul in a way medicine can't explain." When Dorothy's shift ended, she said goodbye to David with a promise to return the next day. She left the hospital with a mix of hope and apprehension. She'd gotten a chance, but she knew Dr. Richard would be watching her every move, waiting for any sign of failure to prove he was right. That night, Dorothy barely slept. She kept imagining Mr. Walter alone in his room, without the sedative, perhaps trying to remember the songs he'd conducted throughout his life. She thought about David, likely spending the whole night by his father's side, waiting for any sign of improvement. And she thought about Dr. Richard, a clearly competent and experienced man, but one who might have become so rigid in his convictions that he lost the ability to consider possibilities beyond medical textbooks. The next morning, Dorothy arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. Her heart raced as she walked up to the 4th floor. Had Mr. Walter made it through the night? Were there more reactions? Or was Dr. Richard right, and it was all just meaningless reflexes? When she reached room 405, she found a small crowd. Besides David, there was Dr. Richard, 2 residents, Sister Margaret, and 2 nurses she didn't know well. They were all talking in hushed, excited tones. "Mrs. Dorothy," David called as soon as he saw her. "You won't believe what happened." Her heart leapt. "What? Did he get worse?" "Worse?" David laughed, emotional. "He improved. During the night, he woke up 3 times calling for Anne, my mother, and trying to sing. Dorothy's legs nearly gave way from relief." "Really?" "The night nurse documented everything," said Dr. Williams, holding a clipboard full of notes. "Increased neural activity, voluntary hand movements, attempts at vocalization. It's extraordinary." Dorothy looked at Dr. Richard, hoping to see some satisfaction or at least acknowledgement, but his expression was hard to read. "And what do you think, Doctor?" she asked him directly. Dr. Richard cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "The case has shown some unexpected developments," he admitted reluctantly. "We'll continue monitoring." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest to admitting he was wrong that Dorothy would get from him at that moment. "Can I sing to him again?" she asked. "Please," David said. "The nurse told me he got restless early this morning and only calmed down when she hummed Country Roads like you taught her." Dorothy stepped closer to the bed. Mr. Walter's eyes were closed, but his breathing was visibly stronger. When she began singing softly, his eyes opened almost immediately. "Anne," he whispered, looking right at her. "No, Mr. Walter. It's me, Dorothy. Dorothy, the cleaning lady." He blinked a few times as if trying to focus. "Dorothy," he repeated slowly. "You sing." "I do, Mr. Walter. I really love your favorite song. Country Roads." He smiled weakly. My song." David moved closer to the head of the bed. "Dad, it's me. David. Your son." Mr. Walter turned his head slowly toward the voice. "David." His eyes filled with tears. My boy. "I'm here, Dad, I'm here." Dr. Richard Thompson watched everything with an increasingly thoughtful expression. Suddenly, he approached the bed. "Mr. Walter, do you know where you are?" The old conductor looked around, confused. "Hospital," he said after a few seconds. "Very good. Do you know what day it is today?" That question left him even more confused. He shook his head. "No, I don't know." "That's all right," Dr. Richard said gently. "Do you remember what happened?" I was watering the plants." Walter closed his eyes, straining to remember. "Then, nothing." "You had a stroke, Dad," David explained kindly. "You've been here for 3 weeks." 3 weeks? Walter seemed frightened. "But you're getting better now," Dorothy said, holding his hand. "The music brought you back." "Music," he smiled again. "Always. Always music." Dr. Richard stepped away from the bed and motioned for the residents to follow him out of the room. Dorothy stayed with David, continuing to hum softly as Walter drifted between moments of clarity and confusion. In the hallway, she could hear Dr. Richard speaking in hushed tones with his students. Though she couldn't make out every word, she could tell his tone had completely changed from the day before. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. About an hour later, Dr. Richard returned to the room alone. His expression was serious but no longer hostile. "Mr. David, I need to speak with you," he said. David looked tense. "Is there a problem, Doctor?" "Actually, no. Quite the opposite. Based on his progress over the last 24 hours, I'm going to completely revise your father's treatment plan. What do you mean? We'll stop the sedative altogether and include music therapy in his treatment. I also want to consult a neurologist who specializes in cognitive rehabilitation. David was stunned. Really? Really? Your father is showing signs of recovery that I didn't expect to see. Dr. Richard turned to Dorothy, who had been quiet in the corner of the room. And you, Mrs. Dorothy... He hesitated for a moment. I'd like you to continue with the music sessions. Officially. Dorothy couldn't believe what she was hearing. Officially? I'll speak to the administration to have it included in his treatment. You'd have scheduled times to come here and sing for the patient. Doctor. Dorothy felt her eyes welling up. I don't know what to say. You can say yes, David smiled. My father will need you. Yes, of course, she said, moved. I accept. Dr. Richard still seemed uncomfortable, but was clearly making an effort to be fair. Mrs. Dorothy, I owe you an apology. Yesterday, I was dismissive in my response to your observations. Doctor, you don't have to... I do. Medicine is a science, but it's also an art. And sometimes we doctors forget the art part. We forget that patients are whole people, not just bodies with problems to fix. Dorothy was surprised by his sincerity. You're a good doctor, Doctor. You just got a little, how should I say, stuck in the books. Stuck in the books, he repeated thoughtfully. Maybe that's it. Thank you for reminding me that not everything is in the books. David watched the conversation with a smile. Doctor, does this mean my father will be okay? Dr. Richard chose his words carefully. It means he has a real chance at recovery. I can't promise he'll be exactly as he was before, but his basic cognitive functions seem to be improving. With physical therapy, speech therapy, and, he looked at Dorothy, music therapy, he can have a very good quality of life. Thank you, Doctor, said David, shaking the doctor's hand. Thank you for giving him a chance. In the weeks that followed, Room 405 became one of the liveliest places in the hospital. Dorothy now had official times scheduled for her music sessions with Mr. Walter. In the morning, she did her regular cleaning work. In the afternoon, she returned to sing. The old conductor progressed quickly. Within days, he was already singing along with her, though his voice was still weak. In a week, he was moving both hands to conduct the music. In 2 weeks, he was sitting up in bed, telling stories about the municipal band's performances. Dr. Richard, who initially visited the room just out of protocol, began showing up during the music sessions. Dorothy noticed he seemed genuinely fascinated by the patient's recovery. Mrs. Dorothy, he said one afternoon after a particularly lively session where Mr. Walter had sung 3 full songs, have you ever considered studying music therapy formally? Studying? Dorothy laughed. Doctor, I'm almost 70. So? It's never too late to learn. There are short courses, specializations. You have a natural talent for this. I don't know, Doctor. I'm happy doing what I do. Think about it. The hospital could sponsor a course for you. It would be good for us to have someone with your sensitivity on the team. David, who was listening, perked up. Mrs. Dorothy, that would be amazing. You could help other patients. Other patients? Of course, said Dr. Richard. There are many studies on the benefits of music therapy for Alzheimer's, depression, even chronic pain. You could make a difference in so many lives. Dorothy grew thoughtful. Could she really learn new things at nearly 70? Could she really help others the way she had helped Mr. Walter? I'll think about it, she finally said. That night at home, Dorothy stared at the photo of her husband on the living room table. Robert, do you think I should try? Study music and medicine? As always, the answer didn't come in words, but in a warm feeling in her chest, as if Robert were saying, Of course, my dear. You've always been good with people. 3 weeks later, Mr. Walter was discharged from the hospital. He still needed physical therapy and medical follow-ups, but he was cognitively well and could walk with a cane. On the day of his discharge, he made sure to speak privately with Dorothy. Dorothy, my dear, he said, holding her hands in his, you saved me. I didn't save anything, Mr. Walter. The music saved you. The music only worked because you believed in it, because you saw in me what no one else could. I saw a musician. I saw someone who loved life and deserved a second chance. And now I want to give you a second chance too. What do you mean? Mr. Walter smiled mysteriously. I spoke with some of my friends at the conservatory. They were interested in your story. They want to talk to you about possibilities. What possibilities? Dorothy, you have a gift. It's not just singing. It's sensing people, understanding what they need. That can't be taught in school. Dorothy was moved. Mr. Walter, will you at least talk to them? I will, she said without hesitation. If it can help others like it helped you, I will. 6 months later, Dorothy was finishing a short course in music therapy at the San Diego Conservatory of Music. She had kept her cleaning job, but now she spent 2 afternoons a week leading music sessions with hospital patients. Dr. Richard had become one of the program's strongest advocates. He had even begun studying the effects of music on treating various medical conditions and often cited Mr. Walter's case in lectures and scientific articles. Mr. Walter, in turn, had nearly fully recovered. He returned to conducting the town band on special occasions and became an unofficial ambassador for music therapy at the hospital. Dorothy discovered she had a special gift for identifying which songs touched each patient's heart. For Mrs. Wilson, an elderly woman with Alzheimer's, it was the Ella Fitzgerald songs she had sung in her youth. For young Ryan, hospitalized with depression, it was the country tunes that reminded him of his grandfather's farm. Each patient was a different world, a different story, a different song. But they all shared something in common, the need to be seen as whole people, not just illnesses to be treated. 1 year after the incident with Mr. Walter, the hospital organized a special event, the official launch of Mercy General Hospital's music therapy program, with Dorothy as its coordinator. The ceremony took place in the hospital auditorium, attended by doctors, staff, patients, and family members. Dr. Richard was the first to speak. "A year ago, I made a mistake that deeply shames me," he began, looking directly at Dorothy in the front row. "I underestimated not just a dedicated employee, but the wisdom that comes from careful observation and genuine care for people." He paused, emotional. "Dorothy Johnson taught me that medicine isn't just science. It's also humanity, intuition, and the courage to admit we can learn from anyone, no matter their academic background." Dorothy felt her eyes well up as applause filled the room. "The program we're launching today," Dr. Richard continued, "doesn't exist because of scientific studies or administrative decisions. It exists because a cleaning lady had the courage to believe an old conductor still had music in his heart." When it was Dorothy's turn to speak, she stood on shaky legs. She had never addressed such a large crowd before. "I'm not good with fancy words," she began, her voice echoing through the auditorium. "I'm better with music and cleaning, but I want to say one thing." She scanned the room, spotting familiar faces. David and Mr. Walter in the second row, Sister Margaret smiling from the right, the residents who had witnessed it all. "For 20 years I've cleaned these hospital halls. I've seen people arrive here scared, in pain, desperate, and I've seen doctors and nurses working hard to help. But sometimes we forget that every person here has a story, their own song." Her voice grew steadier as she spoke. Mr. Walter wasn't just a coma patient. He was a conductor, a father, a man who spent his whole life making music for others. And when traditional medicine couldn't reach him anymore, his music was still there, waiting. She paused, searching for the right words. "I don't want anyone to think I'm criticizing medicine or doctors. Quite the opposite. Dr. Richard and his team saved Mr. Walter's life. But the music saved his soul." The applause was warm and long. When it quieted, Dorothy finished, "This program isn't about music. It's about seeing people. It's about believing everyone deserves to be seen completely, not just as a disease or a problem. It's about remembering that caring for people means seeing them, listening to them, and sometimes singing along." After the ceremony, a small reception was held in the hospital garden. Dorothy was congratulated by dozens of people, many of whom she had helped over the past year. Dr. Richard approached her as the crowd thinned. Dorothy, may I speak with you privately? Of course, Doctor. They moved to a quieter corner of the garden. I wanted to give you this in person, he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. What is it? A letter of recommendation. Some universities in New York are interested in studying the methods you developed. They want to include you in official research on music therapy. Dorothy was speechless. Doctor, You don't have to decide now, but I want you to know you have my full support, whatever path you choose. She held the envelope carefully, as if it was something precious. Doctor, may I ask you something? Of course. Why did you change your mind about me? Was it just because of Mr. Walter? Dr. Richard grew thoughtful for a moment. Not just that. It was because you reminded me why I wanted to be a doctor in the first place. How so? When I was a child, my grandmother fell ill, cancer. The doctors said it was only a matter of time, but there was a nurse, Mrs. Grace, who sang to her every night. My grandmother didn't recover, but she passed peacefully smiling while Mrs. Grace sang a lullaby. Dorothy saw his eyes fill with tears. I went into medicine to be like Mrs. Grace, to care for people completely, not just their illnesses. But somewhere along the way I lost myself. I became so focused on being a competent doctor that I forgot to be a compassionate human being. And now? Now I remember every day, especially when I see you working with patients. You've taught me that technical skill and humanity aren't opposites. They complement each other. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the garden. Doctor, Dorothy finally said, may I tell you something? Of course. You've always been a good doctor. You just needed to remember that being a good doctor isn't just about curing diseases, it's about caring for people. And now you remember that. That makes all the difference. Dr. Richards smiled, a genuine, warm smile Dorothy had never seen before. Thank you, Dorothy, for everything. 2 years later, Dorothy had become a national leader in hospital music therapy. She continued her work at Mercy General, but also traveled the country giving lectures and training medical teams. Mr. Walter had fully recovered and returned to conducting the municipal band regularly. He composed a special song for Dorothy called The Cleaning Angel, which became popular in the band's performances. Dr. Richard published several articles on the importance of compassionate observation in medical treatment, always citing the case that changed his perspective. He implemented a hospital-wide policy of active listening for all staff, from doctors to cleaning personnel. David kept in regular contact with Dorothy, visiting whenever he was in San Diego. He said she was family, the woman who brought his father back to life. But for Dorothy, the greatest reward wasn't the recognition or awards. It was the way each patient's face lit up when they heard their favorite song. It was knowing she'd helped restore dignity and humanity to people who felt reduced to medical diagnoses. On a hot summer afternoon, Dorothy was finishing a session with Mrs. Hope, an 80-year-old patient hospitalized with pneumonia. They'd just sung Amazing Grace together, and the woman's eyes sparkled with joy. Miss Dorothy, Mrs. Hope said as the song ended, you're an angel. I'm no angel, Mrs. Hope, just someone who loves music and loves people. But that's what makes you an angel, loving people, seeing people where others only see illness. Dorothy smiled and adjusted the patient's blankets. You need to rest now. I'll come back tomorrow and we'll sing some more. Dorothy? Yes? Thank you for seeing me. What do you mean, Mrs. Hope? For seeing me as Hope, not just the patient in bed 12. It's been a long time since someone saw me as a person. Dorothy felt her heart tighten. This was exactly why she did what she did, so people like Mrs. Hope would feel seen, respected, loved. Mrs. Hope, you'll always be Hope to me, a beautiful, intelligent woman who sings Amazing Grace better than any famous artist. Oh, stop it, the patient laughed. But thank you, truly. When Dorothy left the room, she found Dr. Thompson in the hallway, returning from a consultation. Good afternoon, Dorothy. How was the session? Good, Doctor. Mrs. Hope is in better spirits. Great. Her vitals have improved significantly since the music sessions began. They walked together down the hall, a partnership that had grown natural over the years. Dorothy, can I confess something? Of course, Doctor. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't changed my mind that day, if I'd kept ignoring your observations about Mr. Walter. But you did change your mind. That's what matters. I did because I had no choice. The evidence was too clear to ignore. But what if it hadn't been? What if his reactions had been subtler? I might have lost the chance to save him because of my pride. Dorothy stopped walking and looked at him. Doctor, there's no use dwelling on what might have been. What's important is that you learned. And now other doctors are learning because of you. That's true. The program's been implemented in 12 hospitals across the state. See? You turned a mistake into something helping hundreds of people. Dr. Thompson smiled. You always know what to say to make me feel better. It's because I like you, Doctor. You're a good person who wants to do right. That counts for a lot. They reached the end of the hall, where their paths diverged. Dr. Thompson headed to his office, Dorothy to the cleaning supply room. Dorothy? Yes? Thank you. For not giving up. For pushing. For teaching me to be a better doctor. Thank you for listening, for giving me a chance. See you tomorrow? See you tomorrow. Dorothy put away her supplies and changed in the locker room. Another workday done, another day of shared music, another day of small victories in the fight to humanize medicine. As she walked to the bus stop, she thought of all the changes since that humiliating day in the hallway. Mercy General had become a more compassionate place where every employee's voice was heard and respected. Dr. Thompson had grown not just as a doctor, but as a person. And she'd learned it's never too late to grow, to learn, to make a difference. When she got home, Dorothy looked at her husband's photo on the living room table. Robert, my love, I think we did it. I think we made the world a little better. And for the first time in years, she was certain she could hear his reply, clear as if he were right there in the room. Of course we did, old girl. I always knew you'd go far. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave a sincere comment. Do you think Dorothy made the right choice by standing by her observations? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe so you don't miss more heartwarming stories.